It was a legendary escape from a place that was supposed to be inescapable. 55 years ago this month, three men pulled off the impossible, breaking out of Alcatraz.
The island doesn't announce itself with noise. It sits there, quiet and watchful, wrapped in drifting fog, as if it knows something the rest of the world doesn't. For generations, people have stared at that lonely patch of rock in San Francisco Bay and felt a strange pull, not because of what's visible, but because of what isn't. Stories linger there, unfinished and unsettled. Questions echo where answers should be. And among all the tales that cling to that place, one rises above the rest, not because it's the most dramatic, but because it refuses to end. Three men vanished into the night, and somehow, decades later, we're still chasing their shadows, not just wondering what they did, but whether they got away with it. Alcatraz wasn't built to inspire curiosity. It was designed to crush it. Long before it became a federal penitentiary, the island served as a military fortress, a defensive outpost guarding the bay. By the time it transformed into a prison in 1934, its purpose had shifted, but its philosophy hadn't. Isolation, control, finality. This wasn't a place meant for rehabilitation or second chances. It was where the system sent men it could no longer manage anywhere else. The ones who broke rules, who escaped too often, who refused to bend. If prisons were statements, Alcatraz was the period at the end of the sentence. Life there was stripped down to its barest form. Cells were small, rigid, and unyielding, designed not just to confine the body, but to wear down the mind. Every movement was tracked, every privilege earned, every silence enforced. Even the routines felt deliberate. Counts conducted again and again, meals eaten under strict supervision, and conversations limited or forbidden. The structure wasn't just about discipline. It was about dominance. The message was clear. This place controlled you, completely. And then there was the water. Cold, fast, and unforgiving, the bay itself was as much a barrier as the prison walls. It wasn't just the distance to shore. It was the currents, the temperature, the unpredictability. Even strong swimmers would struggle to survive for long. That natural defense became part of Alcatraz's identity. People didn't just believe escape was unlikely, they believed it was impossible. That belief mattered. It wasn't just for the guards or the officials, it shaped how inmates saw their own reality. When a place convinces you that escape can't happen, it doesn't just lock the doors, it locks the mind. Over time, that idea became the prison's greatest strength. Not the steel bars, not the watchtowers, not even the armed patrols. It was the certainty, the myth, the unshakable conviction that no one gets out. But myths are fragile things. They don't shatter all at once. They crack. By the early 1960s, Alcatraz had already seen escape attempts. Men had tried and failed, some captured, others lost to the water. Each failure reinforced the legend. Each unsuccessful attempt became proof that the system worked. But in June of 1962, something different happened. Not louder, not more chaotic, just quieter. And that silence would become the most unsettling part of all. Frank Morris wasn't the kind of man who acted on impulse. His history told a different story, one of patience, calculation, and persistence. And he had spent most of his life moving through institutions, learning their rhythms, studying their weaknesses. Where others saw walls, he saw patterns. Where others saw limits, he saw variables. By the time he arrived at Alcatraz, he wasn't just another inmate. He was already analyzing it. Near him were two brothers, John and Clarence Anglin. Their story was different, but their mindset aligned. They had grown up relying on each other, adapting to hardship, thinking practically about survival. That kind of bond doesn't fade. It sharpens. When they found themselves side by side again, inside the most secure prison in the country, it didn't take long for something to form. Not just a plan, but a shared understanding. There was a fourth man too, Alan West, who would become part of the effort. Together, they weren't reckless. They didn't rush. They observed. They listened. They waited. And slowly, almost invisibly, they began to act. The prison had flaws. Not obvious ones, not the kind you'd notice on a quick inspection. But time had done its work. The concrete behind certain areas had weakened from years of exposure to salt air. It wasn't crumbling, but it wasn't solid either. And that was enough. Using tools that barely qualified as tools, spoons, fragments of metal, they started chipping away, not quickly, not forcefully, carefully, quietly. Night after night, small amounts at a time. It wasn't just about digging. It was about not being noticed. Timing mattered. Sound mattered. Even distraction mattered. During designated music hours, noise became their ally. What sounded like harmless activity masked something much more deliberate. As the openings grew, so did the ambition. This wasn't just about getting out of a cell. That was only the first step. Beyond the walls lay maintenance corridors, hidden spaces, forgotten pathways, areas the prison no longer paid close attention to. The men mapped it out mentally, turning scraps of opportunity into a route. But the most striking part of their plan wasn't the digging. It was the illusion. They understood something crucial. Escape didn't happen the moment you left your cell. It happened the moment no one realized you were gone. So they created presence in their absence. Dummy heads, shaped and painted with surprising detail, rested on pillows. Blankets arranged to mimic sleeping bodies. From a distance, in low light, everything looked normal. Routine inspections passed without alarm, and the prison believed the men were still there, because it had no reason to think otherwise. By the time morning came, and the truth surfaced, hours had already slipped away. What happened next is where certainty dissolves. The official narrative leaned heavily in one direction. The water claimed them. It made sense. It fit the logic. The bay had always been the final obstacle, the one factor no plan could fully control. Debris was found, pieces of a raft, personal items. To many, that was enough. Case closed. But not everyone was convinced, because the plan itself suggested something else. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. It was precise, layered, and deeply thought out. The raft they constructed wasn't improvised in a moment of desperation. It was engineered over time, built from materials they had carefully gathered and repurposed. Even inflation had been considered. Every detail pointed to preparation, not chance. And then there were the questions that refused to disappear. No bodies, no definitive proof, just assumptions built on probability. Years turned into decades, and the story didn't fade. It evolved. Reports surfaced, alleged sightings, family claims. Then, much later, something unexpected. A letter. It claimed survival. It described a life lived quietly, in hiding, far from the island that once defined them. It wasn't confirmed. It wasn't disproven. It simply existed. Another piece of a puzzle that never quite fits together. Science entered the conversation too. Tidal patterns, current simulations, environmental reconstructions, all suggesting that under the right conditions, survival wasn't impossible. Difficult, absolutely. Unlikely, maybe. But not impossible. And that's where the story lives now. Not in certainty, but in possibility. Because what makes this mystery endure isn't just the question of whether they lived or died. It's what their attempt represents. A challenge to something that was never supposed to be challenged. A disruption of a system built on control and certainty. Whether they made it or not, they proved something fundamental. Even the strongest structures have weaknesses. Even the most rigid systems can be studied, understood, and, under the right circumstances, outmaneuvered. Alcatraz still stands today, no longer a prison, but not entirely free of its past either. Visitors walk its corridors, look into its cells, and imagine what it must have felt like. But beneath that curiosity lies something deeper, a sense that the story isn't finished, which that's somewhere, hidden in all the speculation and fragments of evidence, the truth is still out there. Maybe it always will be, and that might be the most unsettling part of all.